Day 23. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 3 weeks, and the investigation faces its most significant challenge yet. The DNA results that everyone has been waiting for are delayed by weeks, possibly months, and in the worst-case scenario, could take up to a year. Let's start with what happened this past weekend. On Saturday and Sunday, volunteer searchers were combing the area near Nancy Guthrie's home on Orange Grove Road in the Catalina foothills. They found a backpack in a culvert not far from where Nancy was taken. Immediately, investigators were notified. True crime reporter Jonathan Lee Riches, who goes by JLR Investigates on social media, shared photos of sheriff's deputies bagging the backpack as evidence. For a brief moment, there was hope. Could this be the backpack from the doorbell camera footage? The 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack that the suspect was wearing when he approached Nancy's home on the night she disappeared? This morning, Monday, February 23rd, the Pima County Sheriff's Department released a statement. And the answer was no. After reviewing the bag and its contents, it does not appear to be a viable lead for the investigation. 3 reasons why. First, it's not the same brand. The suspect in the doorbell camera footage was carrying an Ozark Trail backpack, which is sold exclusively at Walmart. The backpack found by volunteers wasn't an Ozark Trail, it was a completely different brand. Second, the backpack appears to have been outside for much longer than 3 weeks. It was weathered, damaged, clearly sitting in that culvert for months, not since January 31st when Nancy was taken. And third, inside the backpack, investigators found a piece of identification belonging to a minor. This wasn't the suspect's backpack. This was just a random backpack that had been discarded long before Nancy disappeared, completely unrelated to her case. So the discovery that gave people hope over the weekend turned out to be nothing. Another false alarm. Another dead end in a case that's already seen too many dead ends. The same thing happened last week with the glove. On February 11th, investigators found a black glove about 2 miles from Nancy's home. The glove appeared to match the gloves worn by the suspect in the doorbell camera footage. It was collected by FBI agents, bagged as evidence, and sent to the lab for DNA analysis. Everyone thought this was it. This was the piece of evidence that would break the case wide open. The suspect wore those gloves. His DNA would be on them. They'd run it through CODIS, the FBI's national DNA database, get a match, and identify him within days. But that's not what happened. Last week, authorities announced that the DNA from the glove does not match any entries in CODIS. No match at all, which means the suspect's DNA isn't in the FBI's national database. He's never been arrested for a serious crime that required DNA collection, or if he has, his sample was never entered into the system. And there's another problem. The DNA from the glove also doesn't match the DNA collected from inside Nancy Guthrie's home, which raises questions. Is the glove actually from the suspect? Was there contamination? Did someone else handle the glove after the suspect discarded it? Investigators are still trying to figure that out. So the glove, which everyone believed would be the smoking gun, gave us nothing. Another dead end. Now, the only real hope is the DNA found inside Nancy's home. DNA that doesn't belong to Nancy or anyone in close contact with her. DNA that presumably came from the suspect. DNA that could finally tell us who this man is and where to find Nancy. But that DNA is stuck, and it's going to be a while before we get answers. Last Friday, February 21st, Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos gave an interview to NBC News, and he revealed the problem. The DNA samples collected from Nancy Guthrie's home are what's called mixed DNA. Multiple people's DNA blended together in the same sample, and separating those samples, identifying individual genetic profiles, is incredibly difficult and time-consuming. Sheriff Nanos told NBC News there's a snag at the private lab in Florida that's testing these mixed DNA samples. He also said the timeline for getting results could be weeks, months, or in the worst-case scenario, maybe even a year. A year. After 23 days of searching, after more than 40,000 tips, after 400 FBI agents and deputies working around the clock, we might not have DNA results for another year. Here's why this is such a massive problem. When DNA is mixed, you can't just run it through a database and get an answer. You have to separate the individual profiles first. It's like trying to unmix 2 colors of paint after they've already been blended together. Technically possible, but it requires specialized techniques, advanced algorithms, and an enormous amount of time. The lab in Florida is working on it. They're using every tool at their disposal, but they're hitting obstacles. And until they can isolate a clean DNA profile from the suspect, They can't move forward with genetic genealogy, which is the technique that solved cases like the Golden State Killer and the Idaho murders. Now, once they do get a clean profile, the process becomes faster. They'll upload that DNA to public genealogy databases like GED Match and Family Tree DNA. These are databases where people voluntarily upload their DNA results from ancestry tests like 23andMe or Ancestry.com, and investigators can search those databases to find genetic relatives of the suspect. But there's another complication. The law prevents police from directly searching private databases like Ancestry.com or 23andMe. Those databases have tens of millions of users, massive pools of genetic data, but investigators can't access them. They're restricted to public databases, which are much smaller. GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA combined have maybe a few million profiles, and not all of those are useful for law enforcement purposes. So even after the lab isolates the suspect's DNA, there's no guarantee they'll find a match. If the suspect doesn't have any relatives who've uploaded their DNA to public databases, genetic genealogy won't work, and they'll have to find another way to identify him. Barbara Ray Venter, a genetic genealogy expert who helped catch the Golden State Killer, told the media that these database limitations are adding significant time to the Nancy Guthrie investigation. She said that while the technique works, it's not magic. It depends on having the right relatives in the right databases, and sometimes that just doesn't happen quickly. But there is hope. Cece Moore, another genetic genealogy expert who's worked on hundreds of cases, told reporters that they've had success with mixed DNA samples before. She said the process takes time, but it's possible. She's seen cases where mixed DNA was successfully separated and used to identify suspects. It just requires patience. So there is a path forward, but it's a long path, and nobody knows exactly how long it's going to take. While investigators wait for the DNA results, they're not sitting idle. According to the Pima County Sheriff's Department, several hundred law enforcement personnel remain dedicated to this case. The FBI has 400 agents and deputies assigned to the investigation, and they're actively pursuing other leads. This past weekend, authorities announced that detectives and agents are back in Nancy's neighborhood, canvassing door to door. They're talking to residents again, asking if anyone has remembered anything new, if anyone has seen anything suspicious in the week since Nancy was taken, if anyone has information they haven't shared yet. They're also working to identify the clothing worn by the suspect in the doorbell camera footage. Sheriff Nanos told NBC News last Friday that investigators are getting closer to identifying the suspect's pants, shoes, shirt, and jacket. They're showing photos of these items to manufacturers, retailers, outdoor stores, trying to narrow down where they were purchased and when. And they're still working on the gun holster. The suspect was wearing a holster with some pretty unique characteristics, according to Sheriff Nanos. It's not a standard holster you'd find at just any store. Investigators are contacting gun shops across Arizona and neighboring states, showing them images of the holster, hoping someone will recognize it and provide information about who might have purchased it. They've also been collecting multiple gloves from the area around Nancy's home. Not just the one from 2 miles away, but several gloves found during searches. They're analyzing all of them, looking for any connection to the suspect, any additional DNA that might help. And they're still searching for Nancy's pacemaker. The device disconnected from the app on her phone around 2:30 a.m. on February 1st, about 40 minutes after her Nest camera was disconnected. Investigators are using a signal sniffer device mounted on a helicopter, hoping to detect a signal from the pacemaker if it's still active. But so far, nothing. Despite all these efforts, Sheriff Nanos admitted to NBC News that his department currently has no names they're investigating, no suspects, no persons of interest. They have a man on video, but they don't know who he is. And this is where the case stands on day 23. Waiting, hoping, praying that the DNA lab in Florida can work a miracle. The reward for information leading to Nancy's whereabouts has now reached $2,500. That includes $100,000 from the FBI and an additional $102,500 from an anonymous donor. It's one of the largest rewards in recent Arizona history. More than 40,000 tips have come in between the sheriff's office and the FBI. The Pima County Sheriff's Department alone has received over 1,600 tips through their local tip line. But here's the problem. According to dispatch manager Cecilia Ochoa, most of those calls aren't actually useful tips. They're people calling with opinions, theories, premonitions, and speculation. Ochoa made a public plea last week asking people to think before they call. She said, if you're thinking about calling in a tip or a lead, take a moment and ask yourself, is this tip viable? Is it credible? What we don't want are opinions and thoughts and people wondering if investigators are doing A, B, C, and D. The 911 Communications Center has been absolutely swamped. In the first 18 days of February 2025, the department received 20,808 calls total. In the same time period this year, they received 31,608 calls. That's an increase of more than 10,000 calls, and the vast majority of them are related to Nancy's case. More than 23,000 of those calls were administrative, people calling the non-emergency line with theories and suggestions. The rest were actual 911 emergency calls. It's gotten so overwhelming that the Sheriff's Department had to issue a public statement this past weekend asking volunteer search groups to stay out of the area. They posted on social media, "We all want to find Nancy, but this work is best left to professionals." They said private citizens who want to help can volunteer with the department through official channels, but they shouldn't be conducting their own searches because it can interfere with the investigation. And there's been growing criticism of the true crime media circus that's descended on Nancy's neighborhood. An article published by Axios this week titled "True Crime Frenzy Grows in Nancy Guthrie Case" highlighted concerns from media experts about the coverage. Whitney Phillips, an associate professor at the University of Oregon who teaches a true crime media ethics class, told Axios that the coverage of Nancy's case is really upsetting and really predictable. She said Americans have such distrust in institutions like mainstream media and law enforcement that they've found refuge in true crime influencers operating outside the status quo. The article noted that streamers and bloggers have been sharing photos and videos of people and vehicles they think could be involved in Nancy's disappearance, which has led to the uncontrolled spread of misinformation. People are being accused online with no evidence. Conspiracy theories are spreading, and it's making the investigation harder, not easier. But the influencers covering the case have brushed off the criticism. They argue they're helping solve the case, providing coverage that mainstream media won't, keeping public attention focused on Nancy when law enforcement has yet to make an arrest. It's a debate that's been going on for years in the true crime community. Where's the line between helpful coverage and harmful interference? When does public interest become harassment? When does crowdsourcing tips become vigilante justice? What's clear is that Nancy's case has become one of the most closely watched missing persons investigations in recent memory, partly because she's the mother of Savannah Guthrie, a beloved co-host of the Today Show, partly because the doorbell camera footage is so haunting. A masked man with a gun approaching an elderly woman's home in the middle of the night, and partly because after 23 days, there's still no answer. Savannah Guthrie posted another plea on Instagram 2 weeks after her mother was taken. She said, speaking directly to whoever has her mother, "It's been 2 weeks since our mom was taken, and I just wanted to come on and say that we still have hope, and we still believe. And I wanted to say to whoever has her or knows where she is, that it's never too late. You're not lost or alone, and it is never too late to do the right thing." The family has said they're willing to pay for Nancy's safe return, though they haven't disclosed a specific amount. They've made it clear, repeatedly, that they just want their mother back. No questions asked, no judgment, just bring her home. But as the days turn into weeks, and the weeks threaten to turn into months, hope is getting harder to hold on to. Not impossible, but harder. The Pima County Sheriff's Department released a statement this weekend that ended with this line: "This will remain an active investigation until Nancy Guthrie is found, or all leads are exhausted," which raises the question nobody wants to ask. What happens if the leads are exhausted? What happens if the DNA doesn't give them a name? What happens if Nancy's pacemaker is never found? What happens if the man in that doorbell camera footage just vanishes into the desert and is never identified? Law enforcement officials, when asked, say they're not there yet. They say there are still plenty of avenues to pursue. They say the DNA is the key, and once those results come back, everything could change very quickly. Genetic genealogy has solved cold cases that were decades old, 6 weeks, 6 months, even 40 years after the crime. So there's no reason to lose hope. But 23 days feels like an eternity when someone you love is missing. And for Savannah Guthrie and her siblings, every day without answers is another day of unimaginable pain. So where does the case go from here? We wait. We wait for the DNA lab in Florida to isolate a clean profile. We wait for that profile to be uploaded to genealogy databases. We wait for a match, for a family tree to be built, for investigators to narrow down potential suspects. And we hope that process happens in weeks, not months, certainly not years. In the meantime, if you have any information about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, the FBI is asking you to call 1-800-CALL-FBI. Or you can contact the Pima County Sheriff's Department at 88 Crime. But please, only call if you have actual credible information, not theories, not speculation, real tips that could help bring Nancy home. This is day 23 of the Nancy Guthrie case. And the hardest part of covering a story like this is acknowledging that sometimes investigations stall. Sometimes the leads dry up. Sometimes the evidence doesn't cooperate. And all you can do is wait. But waiting doesn't mean giving up. The FBI hasn't given up. The Pima County Sheriff's Department hasn't given up. Nancy's family certainly hasn't given up, and neither should we. Because somewhere out there someone knows something. Someone saw something. Someone heard something. And one tip, one piece of information, one break in this case could change everything. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She's a mother, a grandmother, a friend. She was taken from her home on January 31st, and she deserves to be found. Her family deserves answers, and the man who took her deserves to be held accountable. So if you know something, say something. And if you don't, keep Nancy in your thoughts. Keep sharing her story. Keep the pressure on. Because the moment we stop paying attention is the moment cases like this go cold. And Nancy Guthrie's case cannot go cold.